Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28. The old oil lamp on the bedside table flickered once, then steadied. Its warm golden light painted soft patterns across the walls, like the hush of a lullaby wrapping itself around the room. Outside, the sky was already deep blue to nearly black, but not quite. The stars were beginning their slow emergence, like faithful sentinels returning to their watch. And in the hush of that twilight hour, Clara sat alone on the edge of her bed, her hands resting in her lap, quiet and folded like pages of a worn book. She had done enough today. She had folded the towels and written a letter she would likely never send. She had swept the porch and warmed a bowl of soup. She had answered the phone once, and let it go to voicemail once too. And now, in this moment, this quiet, nearly sacred moment, she was ready to let go. But her body didn't always listen to the quiet. It ached in ways that had grown familiar. The way old tree roots ache, buried deep, carrying stories of storms and summers. And her mind, oh, it had its ways of wandering. Not far, just enough to make sleep feel like a stranger at times. She exhaled slowly. Clara reached for the Bible on her nightstand. Its edges were frayed, pages soft like cotton from being turned so many times. She didn't need to open it to know what she needed to hear. The words had already lived themselves into her memory. Come to me, all you who are weary. Weary didn't always mean exhausted. Sometimes it meant having loved deeply, having waited long, having hoped, even when it hurt. She thought about that tonight. There were photographs on the shelf near the window. One of her husband. Long gone now, his smile frozen in time beside a lake in autumn. One of the children scattered now, busy with families of their own, and one of her as a girl, barefoot in a garden, squinting into the sunlight. Time had been gentle with her, but not always kind. The lamp dimmed again, and she reached up to adjust the wick. It flared briefly, then softened back into that tender, honey-colored glow. Just enough light to remind her she wasn't alone. Not truly. She leaned back into her pillow, her frame sinking into the mattress like a leaf settling onto water, her hand still resting gently on the edge of her Bible. There was no need to perform, no need to prove. Tonight was not for thinking, it was for resting and remembering. She remembered the day she first heard that verse. She was 16. The pastor had read it slowly, carefully, his voice trembling just a little. She remembered the way it made her heart pause, as though someone had opened a window in her soul and let fresh air pour in. Even now, all these years later, she could feel that breeze. Come to me. It was the voice she still knew by heart. Not loud, never loud, just soft and certain, like the sound of a coat being draped gently over tired shoulders, or the hush of bare feet walking across wooden floors, or the whisper of a lullaby, hummed by someone who knows your every sorrow and stays. Take a deep breath, rest here for a moment. Clara closed her eyes. The lamp was still burning, but she didn't need its light anymore. Not tonight. She felt the weight of the day lifting gently, kindly, like someone peeling away a heavy coat after a long winter walk. She imagined Jesus there, seated by her bed, not saying much, just being near. That was enough. It always had been. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. You are not forgotten. The light still burns beside you. Jesus is near, even when the lamp grows dim, Even to your old age and gray hairs, I am He. I am He who will sustain you. Isaiah 46:4. Morning had passed slowly. It often did now. There was no rush, no alarm, no list. Only the hush of a home that had learned the beauty of quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like prayer. Clara had taken her tea by the window, the same window she always returned to. Its view was modest, a small garden plot, a weathered fence, and beyond that, a line of cedar trees that swayed with the wind like old friends bowing in greeting. The chair by the window had belonged to her mother. She could still see the delicate imprint of her hand on the worn wood. It was not a grand chair, nothing polished or new, but it cradled the body with a kind of memory, as though it knew how to hold grief and hope and all the slow afternoons in between. Clara eased herself into it, slowly, letting her body take its time. The cushion beneath her hips gave with a soft sigh. She placed her tea on the sill, then folded her hands. It was here that she did most of her listening. Not to radios, not to phones, but to the still small things. The breeze, the creak of branches, the occasional chirp of a sparrow, always sounding a little surprised by its own song. And sometimes, in the deep quiet, she could hear the whisper of God. She didn't always know what He was saying, but she knew it was Him. There was a kind of knowing that didn't need words, like the way light spills across the floor without asking permission, or the way the smell of earth after rain can make you close your eyes and feel something you thought you'd lost. She thought about her mother today, how she used to sit in this very chair, knitting long scarves that were more prayer than thread, her lips always moving in silence. Perhaps she, too, had been speaking to God in this place. The window had seen so many seasons. Spring with its wet promise, summer with its wide generosity, autumn, her favorite with its golden hum and soft letting go, and then winter, where everything rests in its own way. Clara exhaled. Outside, a petal fell from the rose bush below. It danced in the wind, caught, and then dropped soft as mercy. She remembered how, when she was younger, she always filled her days. The hours needed to be full, accomplished, marked. But now she understood something deeper. That time could be holy. That sitting in a chair with empty hands and a heart turned toward heaven was not wasteful. But worship, she whispered aloud, though no one was near. Thank you. Just that. The wind stirred the lace curtain. It brushed her cheek like a kiss. She picked up her tea. It had cooled some, but it didn't matter because she drank it anyway. Slowly, deliberately, like someone receiving communion, she watched the light move across the floor. Sometimes she imagined angels walking on that light. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence was enough. Clara shifted in the chair, pulling the knitted shawl around her shoulder. The same one her daughter had made for her, years ago in college. She hadn't worn it in a while, but today felt like a shawl day, one of those soft in-between days where the soul whispers instead of shouts. She closed her eyes. No rush, no hurry, and only the gentle company of peace. There would be soup later, perhaps a hymn to hum, perhaps a small verse to tuck into her pocket like a note from a dear friend. But for now, the chair held her, the window open to the world, and God. God was still here. Take a deep breath, rest here for a moment. Even when the room is empty, you are never alone. Even when the tea cools, warmth is still yours. Even when the days are slow, they are still sacred. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. God does not forget those who sit by the window. He comes quietly and stays. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. John 6:35. The kitchen still smelled like cinnamon. Not strong, just a gentle trace, like a memory hanging in the air. Clara had baked early that morning, before the sun had stretched fully across the lawn. Her hands, though slower now, still knew the rhythm, the measuring, the folding, the kneading. She had been baking bread since she was 12 years old, taught by a grandmother who believed flour and prayer went hand in hand. There had always been something holy about bread. Even as a girl, Clara had noticed how silence gathered in the room when the dough was rising. It was as if the house itself paused, waiting for the miracle to unfold, waiting for the leavened breath to whisper through the bowl and bring life where there had been only flour and water. Today's loaf had turned out just right. The crust golden, still slightly cracking, the inside soft, giving, warm. She had cut 2 slices, one for now, one for later. And as she sat at the small kitchen table, the morning sun catching the edge of her plate, she paused to give thanks. Not just the quiet grace before a meal, but a deeper thankfulness for this day, for this loaf, for the simple truth that God still provides. She tore a piece with her fingers, the way her husband used to do, and remembered. He never liked butter, always preferred his bread plain, like a good man should. He used to tease. She smiled softly at the thought. So many meals shared at this table, so many quiet breakfasts, slow lunches, tea at 4, and every so often a moment like this one where the bread wasn't just bread, it was something more, something sacred. There's a reason, she thought, why Jesus called himself the bread of life, not the cake, not the feast, but bread, daily, humble, sufficient. Clara took another bite and let it rest on her tongue. The warmth, the hint of cinnamon and honey. It tasted like morning, like kindness. She reached for her Bible. It stayed open on the table now, always ready, like an old friend who didn't mind being picked up mid-sentence. Her eyes fell on the verse in John, I am the bread of life. And her heart softened. There were days she didn't feel very hungry, and not for food, not even for conversation. But she was always hungry for him, hungry for peace, for hope, for nearness. And that hunger he always met, never in a rush, never loud, just in small, sustaining moments. A warm slice of bread, a sunbeam on the floor, a single bird singing in the tree outside the kitchen window. He fed her soul in 1,000 quiet ways. She bowed her head, not out of habit, but out of need. Thank you, Jesus, for being enough. And in that moment, she felt it, a warmth that had nothing to do with the oven. It settled in her chest, calm, steady, real. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. Clara sat a little longer at the table, letting the stillness hold her. Later, she would wrap the second slice in linen and bring it to her neighbor, Alice, who hadn't been eating much lately. She wouldn't say much, just leave it on the porch with a note that read, "Still warm." Sometimes that's all a person needs to know, that something is still warm, that someone remembered, that Jesus still feeds the hungry, body and soul. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Jesus is the bread your soul has been longing for. He comes gently, daily, and always enough. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. Psalm 23, 2-3. There was a little path behind Clara's home, not paved, just earth and moss and memory. It curved gently past the garden, wound behind the back fence, and led down a soft hill lined with stones and dandelions. At the end of that path, hidden from the view of cars and noise and everything that felt rushed, there was a river, not a wide one, not the kind you'd find in maps or travel books, but a quiet river, a ribbon of silver water that shimmered beneath the trees and whispered secrets to the roots below. Clara had walked there often. She went slower now, one step at a time, her cane steadying her just enough to feel brave. The air smelled like pine in early summer. There was birdsong somewhere high up in the canopy, soft and scattered like light through leaves. As she reached the riverbank, she let out a long breath. There it was, just as it had always been. The sound of the water, steady, never in a hurry, never loud, just present. She sat on the wooden bench that had been there for years. Her husband had built it, back when their hands were still strong and the future still full of shared plans. It had faded over time, but it held firm, and so did her memories. She remembered picnics here, a red checkered blanket, sticky fingers from jam and biscuits, laughter that had no agenda. She remembered reading psalms beneath the willows, praying aloud when no one was near, weeping softly once, on the day the diagnosis came, and later, weeping again when healing followed. But today, she didn't come to remember. She came to be quiet, to be near the sound of the river. Because there are days, many days now, when talking isn't what the soul needs. What it needs is stillness, something beyond words. The water moved without trying to move. That's what she loved about it. It didn't rush. It didn't force. It just went around rocks, over roots, gently forward. And somehow, when she sat beside it, her heart remembered how to breathe again. There's a rhythm in the river, she thought. A kind of holy heartbeat that matches heaven's pace. She closed her eyes and listened. The breeze through the leaves, the soft flutter of a dragonfly, the quiet thump of her cane resting against the bench. And then, that sound again, the river. A hymn without words, a lullaby for the tired. She opened her Bible and read aloud, her voice hushed, almost reverent. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. She paused there, letting the words sink in, not just into her mind, but deeper. Restore, not just repair, not just patch up, but restore. To bring back what was lost, to rebuild what had worn thin, to fill again what had grown empty. She had needed that more lately, the restoration of the deep places. And here, beside this river, she felt it begin. Take a deep breath, rest here for a moment. A dragonfly paused on the bench beside her. Clara smiled. "I'm still learning to slow down," she whispered. "Still learning to be led." The river replied with silence, but somehow it was enough. She would sit here a while longer. She wouldn't ask for anything, wouldn't plan, wouldn't press, just be. And that was worship. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. God leads you gently. You don't need to rush. Let the sound of His nearness restore your soul. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely, to Psalm 139:4. In the drawer beside her bed, Beneath a folded handkerchief and an old sachet that still faintly smelled of lavender, lay a stack of letters. Most had never been mailed. The ink had faded a little, the corners curled from years of waiting. Clara had written them at night, usually after prayers, when her heart felt full but her mouth felt tired. There was something about pen and paper that allowed her to say things her voice never could. This morning, as the sky stretched itself into soft gray, she opened the drawer and gently pulled out one of the envelopes. The handwriting was hers, steady but slanted with time. To Margaret, it read, "Her sister." It had been years now since they had spoken. Not out of anger, really. Just a long silence that had grown between them, like ivy between stones. At first, they meant to call, to write, to visit. But life, in its quiet way, had distracted them both. And now, so many years had passed that neither one seemed to know how to begin again. Clara ran her finger along the seal. The envelope was never closed. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. She unfolded it slowly. "Dear Margaret, I've been thinking about you again." She stopped reading. She knew the rest by heart. She had written it long ago, sitting at the table one evening while rain tapped against the window like an old hymn. She hadn't mailed it because she wasn't sure what to say. Or maybe because she was afraid it wouldn't be received the way she meant it. But this morning she didn't need to send it. She simply needed to read it, to remember what was inside of her. The tenderness, the ache, the longing to be close again. And she knew. Even if the letter never reached Margaret's hands, the one who knit them both together had already read every word. "Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely." That verse came to her like a warm breeze through a cracked window. She didn't need to say it perfectly. She didn't need to write it right. God already knew. He knew the love beneath the silence, the regret beneath the hesitation, the hope beneath the waiting. Clara folded the letter again, slower this time, as if tucking away something sacred. She didn't cry, not today. Some days you simply feel full in a quiet way. She placed the letter back in the drawer but left it resting on top, no longer buried. Maybe she would mail it. Or maybe she wouldn't. But it was no longer hidden. God had seen it. That was enough. She stood and walked to the window, her shawl brushing gently against her back. Outside, the trees swayed, and she imagined her sister beneath the same sky, perhaps thinking of her too. Love doesn't disappear just because it goes unspoken, she thought. It stays. It waits. And God, He holds every unfinished sentence, every pause, every maybe someday. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. You don't have to know the perfect words. You don't have to make it right all at once. God sees the heart behind the silence. He knows what you meant to say, and He holds it close. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Even unspoken love is heard by God. He reads the letters we never send, and He answers with mercy. Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. Isaiah 40:31. It had started with a single clay pot, a small one, cracked along the edge. It had once held basil, back when Clara's hands were younger and her kitchen more full. Now, years later, it sat on the porch railing, empty, except for a little dust and memory. But on this particular morning, Clara noticed something. A small green shoot, barely rising above the soil. She hadn't planted anything new, not in that pot, not in years. She leaned in closer, careful not to spill her tea. It was definitely sprouting, a slender curl of life, reaching up as if it remembered the sun. Clara smiled. "Well," she whispered, "looks like you were just waiting." The garden had always been a place of hope for her. There were raised beds near the back fence now, a little overgrown but still charming. Lavender, rosemary, and some thyme that refused to give up. Even in late autumn, the garden offered something. Even if only the scent of warm earth or the buzz of a lone bee. Years ago, she'd spent every spring there, bent at the waist, sleeves rolled high, hands buried deep in dirt. She would hum as she worked, usually old hymns, quiet ones, her voice floating up with the breeze. She had stopped tending it regularly after Charles passed, not because she was too tired, but because something inside her had gone still, as though the rhythm of planting and pruning no longer made sense. But the garden had waited. Through the seasons, it had held space for her. Through the winters, it had not complained, Busad. It simply stood like a friend waiting with open arms and no expectations. Clara looked out toward it now from the porch. The grass was a little tall, the edges needed trimming. But in the middle, in the quiet center of that untended place, life was beginning again. A bloom of yellow, a new green vine crawling over the old trellis. Even a bird's nest tucked neatly in the corner of the rose bush. And now this surprise sprout in her old clay pot. Waiting, it seemed, had not been a waste. Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. She whispered the verse, letting it sit on her tongue like a spoonful of honey. Waiting was not weakness. Waiting was trust in disguise. It was a sacred stillness, a holy not yet. Clara wrapped her shawl a little tighter and stepped down the porch steps, each one a little slower now. But she knew her feet still remembered the path. She knelt by the raised bed, knees resting gently on the soft ground. And for the first time in a long while, she touched the soil. Warm, giving, full of hidden promise. She didn't need to do much, not today. Just pull a few weeds, brush away old leaves, run her fingers through the dirt as if remembering a forgotten language. And as she worked, something in her heart loosened, a knot untying and a quiet yes blooming beneath the ribs. She was not too old to begin again. She was not too late for new life. God had waited with her and for her. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. Even if everything feels overgrown, even if the tools are dusty and the days feel long, the gardener never leaves. He is still tending you, still planting, still making things bloom. Bedtime, spiritual takeaway. God waits with you. And in His time, He makes all things grow again. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. 2 Corinthians 12:9. There are some days when your body feels like it remembers everything. Not just the aches, but the tenderness too. The way your shoulders once carried children. The way your hands once held letters and grocery bags and someone else's sorrow. Clara sat at the edge of her bed that evening, not in pain, but in heaviness. The kind that comes not from one thing, but from many small things quietly asking to be laid down. She ran her hand over her knee, stiff now in the evenings, and smiled softly. These old bones, she whispered. They've held a lot. The room was dim. Only the glow from the lamp by the dresser and the last of the golden hour light casting its hush across the floorboards. The quilt her daughter had sewn lay folded at the foot of the bed. She hadn't yet pulled it over her. She simply sat. Sometimes sitting is enough. She looked around the room, the framed photo of her and Charles on their 50th anniversary. A few creased cards from grandchildren stuck to the mirror. A vase holding 3 dried hydrangeas. The quiet had become a companion now, not a stranger. But even familiar silence can carry weight. That's when she heard it. Not a sound in the room, but within. The whisper of something she'd known for a long time. My grace is sufficient for you. It came not like thunder, but like a coat being laid gently on her shoulders. Warm, quiet, weighty in the kindest way. Grace is a strange thing, she thought. It doesn't take the weight away entirely. It just carries it with you. Grace doesn't erase your age. It walks beside it. Grace doesn't demand you move faster. It matches your slow pace and calls it holy. She let out a long breath. There had been times, many times, when she felt she wasn't enough, not strong enough, not joyful enough, not spiritual enough. But grace had met her in all those places. Every not enough had been answered with, "But I am. My power is made perfect in weakness." That verse had confused her once, but now she understood. Weakness was not failure. It was an invitation, an open door to let Jesus be near in the places where she no longer had the strength to hold everything together. Clara stood slowly. She picked up the quilt and draped it over her lap. The weight of it was comforting, familiar, like grace. She didn't need to do anything more tonight, didn't need to solve or fix or accomplish. She simply needed to be held. And she was, take a deep breath, rest here for a moment. You don't have to be strong tonight. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't even have to pray the right prayer. Just be still. Grace knows where to find you. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Grace isn't a reward for strength. It's the gentle presence that carries you when you're tired. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Psalm 23:6. Clara had always believed that certain roads had memories. The one that wound behind the town library, the gravel path leading through the orchard, even the sidewalk in front of the post office all held echoes. Bits of conversations, footsteps of people now gone, the low murmur of laughter in the distance. But there was one path in particular she had walked more times than she could count. It began just past the field of golden grass where the fence had long since fallen. It was narrow, hugged closely by brambles, and in spring, lined with wildflowers that bowed as she passed. This was the path that led to the little white chapel. She hadn't been in some time, not since the days when her knees had more give. But today, something within her stirred. Not a loud voice, not a grand pull, just a quiet knowing. A soft nudge that said, "Walk." So she did. She put on her good shoes, the ones with the worn soles and the memory of Sunday morning stitched into them, and wrapped a scarf around her neck. The wind was light, the sky wide and gentle, the earth firm under her feet. Each step felt both familiar and new. As she walked, her fingers grazed the tops of tall grasses. She passed a gate where a robin watched her, head tilted, curious. She paused once to rest beside a cedar stump, breathing in the hush of nature. The chapel came into view slowly, its steeple rising like a whisper, not loud, not proud, just present. The door creaked a little when she pushed it open. Inside, everything smelled of wood and old hymnals. Dust floated in the sunlight like forgotten blessings. The pews were empty, but not lonely. She took her place on the fourth pew from the front, her usual spot. Long ago, no choir sang, no preacher spoke, only the silence welcomed her. And in that silence, she prayed. Not with words, not with lists, just with presence. A breath, a sigh, a stillness. She didn't ask for anything, didn't confess, didn't plead. She simply sat in the long quiet of home. Because that's what this place had always been. A home for the soul. She looked up at the wooden cross behind the pulpit. The same one that had watched over baptisms and weddings and funerals. The same one she had gazed at during sleepless seasons of grief. And beneath that cross, she felt it again, his nearness. Closer than breath, gentler than memory. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. She was not walking alone. She never had been. Every step of her long journey through joy, through sorrow, through ordinary days had been trailed by mercy. Goodness behind her, Jesus beside her, home before her. She stood slowly, pressing her hand to the back of the pew for balance. A final look at the stained glass window, a final thank you whispered into the quiet. Then she turned and walked home again. Not the same, never the same. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. The path you've walked has not gone unnoticed. Mercy has followed you every step, and Jesus is still leading you home. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Revelation 21:4. There were boxes in the closet she hadn't opened in years, taped shut, labeled in fading ink. Some marked with seasons, others simply with names. One morning, without planning to, Clara found herself standing in front of them. She didn't come looking for anything. It was the quiet that drew her. The way the morning sunlight streamed across the hardwood floor, like an invitation. She opened the smallest box first. Inside, a stack of birthday cards and still tucked in their envelopes. The earliest one dated back to 1974. Her son's handwriting rounded and uneven. To Mom, it said in green crayon, "You make the best cinnamon toast." Clara smiled, her breath catching a little. She hadn't thought about those mornings in years. She reached deeper, old ticket stubs, a pressed flower, a photo of her holding a newborn in a faded blue blanket. So many pieces of time, moments that had passed like leaves in a stream. Then she opened a larger box, heavier. Letters from Charles during the war. A few notebooks she had used for journaling in the 90s, their pages stained with coffee rings. A program from her daughter's graduation. And then, a photo. She hadn't expected that one. It was of her and her sister, standing on a beach, maybe 17 or 18 years old, both barefoot, both laughing. Clara sat down slowly, her knees creaking a little. She stared at the photo for a long time. There were years, she realized, that she had let slip by, not wasted, but lost in a way. Years where grief dimmed her. Years where bitterness came softly and stayed longer than she meant to let it. Years that could have been filled with more light, more tenderness, more forgiveness. She thought of the birthday she had missed, the call she never made, the forgiveness she took too long to offer. It was all there quietly waiting to be seen. And for a moment, her heart ached, but only for a moment. Because as she held the photograph to her chest, she whispered into the still room, "Even the lost years belong to you." And she believed it. Nothing was wasted in the hands of Jesus. Not the birthdays missed, not the letters unsent, not the long pauses between reconciliations. Even time that felt broken could be held, healed, redeemed. Clara stood and lit a candle, not for anyone else to see, just for herself. A small flame in the kitchen window, flickering against the morning light. A symbol, a prayer, a quiet yes. The years she thought had slipped away, they were never truly gone. God had been there, even in her silence, even in her forgetting, even in the ache of what might have been. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. The light of Jesus reaches backward as well as forward. Even your lost years are held gently in His grace. Even your regrets are wrapped in His mercy. And there is still time. Time to love, time to forgive, time to light a candle and say, I'm still here, Lord, and I'm still yours. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. No moment is truly lost with God. He gathers every forgotten year, and in His mercy, restores what time tried to erase. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. It was one of those days when the world seemed hushed before it even began. The kind of quiet that isn't empty, but full of something holy. The wind had calmed. No birds called from the trees. Even the branches outside Clara's window swayed gently, as though listening. She sat in her favorite chair, the one by the kitchen door that opened to the garden, a mug of warm milk in her hand. Her Bible, unopened, resting on her lap. She hadn't spoken much that morning, not even to herself. There were days when the need for words faded, not out of sorrow, not out of weariness, just because silence had more to say. So she listened. The clock ticked slowly behind her, a drip of rain from the roof, a creak of the floor beneath her feet. And then, something deeper. Not a sound, really, but a presence. There, in the stillness, she felt it. Him, not just near, but in the breath between thoughts, in the quiet rhythm of her own heartbeat, in the space where fear had once lived but had since grown quiet. Be still and know. It wasn't a command, not to her. It was a comfort, a gentle reminder that she didn't need to perform or produce or press forward. She only needed to be still, known, loved. Clara closed her eyes. She remembered something from her childhood, a time she had climbed into her mother's lap during a thunderstorm. No words were exchanged, no stories told, just arms around her, the steady beat of another heart, safety without explanation. That was how this felt now. Not dramatic, not loud, just safe. I don't always hear you, Lord, she whispered, but I know you're here. And somehow, in that moment, it felt like He smiled. Not with a mouth, but with presence, with nearness. Clara had often wondered what it would be like to hear God's voice. Would it be thunder? Would it be music? Would it be a whisper? Today, she realized, sometimes His voice sounds like nothing, like the breath before dawn, like the pause in a prayer, like the hush that settles when love is present and needs no introduction. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. You don't need to try so hard. You don't need to chase Him. He is already here. In your stillness, in your waiting, in the soft places where your soul lies open. Be still and know. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. God speaks in the silence. When you stop striving, you begin hearing. His nearness is never loud, but always certain. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Psalm 23:5. The old teacup had a chip along the rim, just a small one, barely visible unless the light caught it just right. Clara always reached for that cup first. She had others nicer ones, bone china with gilded edges, a floral mug her granddaughter had painted in Sunday school. But something about this chipped one called to her, as if it knew her story. She filled it with warm chamomile and carried it to the table by the window. Outside, dusk was slowly folding the day in its arms. The sky wore its softer colors: lavender, faded blue, the faintest trace of gold. She wrapped her hands around the cup and closed her eyes. She thought of all the things in her life that felt chipped, friendships that faded with time, dreams she no longer chased, joys that came and then quietly left. And yet, here she was, still held, still breathing, still wrapped in the quiet mercy of God. Clara took a sip. The warmth settled in her chest like peace. Her cup was not empty, not even close. It didn't matter that she didn't travel far anymore, or that the phone rang less often than it once did. It didn't matter that some plans had changed, or some people had drifted. What she had now was full of quiet days and familiar routines, full of scripture passages that felt more alive than ever, full of small miracles: sunlight through curtains, warm socks, the feeling of clean sheets. She remembered Psalm 23, a passage she had known since she was a girl. My cup overflows. It had puzzled her once. How could something overflow when it looked so simple? But now she understood. It wasn't about having everything you asked for. It wasn't about abundance in the world's eyes. It was about presence, about goodness that lingered, about knowing you are not alone, even in stillness. She leaned back in her chair and let the silence fill the room. There had been times in her life when she thought her cup was empty. The year her mother died, the night Charles didn't come home from the hospital, the slow, aching Christmas after her sister moved away and never wrote back. Those had been bitter sip, but even then, Grace had been there, quiet but steady, a drop at a time. And now, in this season of age and slowness, she saw it clearly. Her cup had never been empty. It had always held enough and more. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. You may feel chipped. You may think you've been poured out too many times, but your life is still full. Your cup is still held in God's hands, and in Him it still overflows. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Even when life feels worn or small, God's goodness overflows. You are not forgotten. Your cup is not empty. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some have entertained angels without knowing it. Hebrews 13:2. The knock on the door came just as the sun dipped behind the treetops. Clara wasn't expecting anyone. She hadn't had a visitor in several days, maybe longer. Most folks these days called ahead or more often didn't call at all. It didn't trouble her anymore. She had made peace with quiet rhythms. But still a knock, soft, patient. She set aside her knitting, slipped her feet back into her house shoes, and walked slowly to the door. When she opened it, she found a woman standing there. She was young, perhaps in her 30s, with a worn backpack slung over one shoulder, and a kind of tiredness in her eyes that Clara recognized. The kind that doesn't come from walking, but from carrying something invisible. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said quietly. "But my car broke down up the road. My phone died. I saw your light." Clara nodded. There was no need for questions. "Come in," she said gently. "Let's get you warm." The woman stepped inside, her shoes damp from the grass. She looked around the small home, eyes landing on the quilt draped over the armchair, the small lamp glowing on the bookshelf. The smell of cinnamon from the tea Clara had just steeped. "It's beautiful," she whispered, "peaceful." Clara poured her a cup without asking and set a plate of biscuits on the table. They sat together as the sky turned to deep blue. The woman said her name was Marlene. She'd been on her way to see her mother, who lived 2 towns over. She hadn't seen her in years. She said, "Not since the falling out. I thought maybe it was time," she added, her voice small. "But I'm scared." Clara didn't give advice, she only listened. And when Marlene's eyes filled with tears, Clara reached out her hand and held it, not tightly. Just enough to remind her she wasn't alone. They talked for an hour, maybe 2, of mothers, of regrets, of second chances. And when Marlene finally stood to leave her phone now charging by the side lamp, her heart a little lighter, Clara walked her to the door. "Thank you," the younger woman said, eyes glistening. "I don't know why, but being here felt like rest." Clara smiled. "Sometimes God sends us where we didn't plan to go," she said softly. "Sometimes grace looks like a porch light in the dark." The woman hugged her gently and stepped into the night. Clara watched her walk up the path, the glow of her flashlight bouncing in the distance. Then she closed the door, but not her heart. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. She would never know all that Marlene carried, but she had offered what she could. Warmth, a cup, a quiet place to breathe. And that, too, was worship. That, too, was love. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Sometimes you are the one in need of comfort. Sometimes you are the one who gives it. In both, God is near. In repentance and rest is your salvation. In quietness and trust is your strength. Isaiah 30:15. It had taken Clara nearly 20 minutes to walk from her front porch to the garden bench today. 20 minutes for a path that used to take 5. She had paused 3 times along the way, once to catch her breath, once to admire the bloom of an early daffodil, and once just because she needed to sit on the wooden step halfway down the garden path. She hadn't rushed. Not because she couldn't, but because she didn't need to. There was no clock watching her. No appointment waiting, and just the sun moving slowly across the sky, and the invitation to let the day unfold at the pace of peace. She smiled as she eased herself onto the bench, one slow movement at a time. The wind was barely a breath. The trees whispered above her like they were telling secrets meant only for heaven. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and closed her eyes. For years, she had measured her days by what she could do. Errands, tasks, goals. Even after retirement, it had taken her a long time to let go of the urge to produce something every day. Even her rest in those early years had felt like a reward she had to earn. But now her steps were fewer, and each one meant more. Every small act had become prayer. Pouring tea, sweeping the porch, watering the single plant by the door. Even her breathing had become deliberate, like a soft chant. Inhale. Thank you. Exhale. I trust you. The world, she had learned, would not stop spinning just because she moved slower. It would wait. And if it didn't, well, she no longer needed to chase it. Clara opened her eyes and looked out over the yard. A robin hopped along the fence post, chest proud, wings tucked. There was no hurry in its movements, just purpose. She liked that. She wanted to live that way too. In quietness and trust is your strength. The verse came to her without reaching. It had settled itself into her bones over the years like truth gently seeping into her soul. She didn't have to do more to be loved, didn't have to be faster to be useful, didn't have to speak louder to be heard. The kingdom of God, she had discovered, was not a place of rush. It was a place of roots, of quiet, of presence. And she, slower, older, still was right in the center of it. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. You are not behind. You are not less. Fewer steps can lead to deeper peace. God is not in a hurry with you. He walks beside you, at your pace, with love. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. God does not measure you by your speed, but by your nearness. Even slow steps, taken in faith, lead you deeper into his rest. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. Psalm 91:4. The quilt had been made from pieces of old dresses, shirts too soft to wear anymore, scraps from curtains long gone, and bits of fabric collected over decades. Clara had sewn it slowly, one square at a time during the first winter after Charles passed. Back then, the days had felt long and hollow. She needed something for her hands to do while her heart quietly healed. The quilt had given her that. Not just warmth, but memory. Each square held a story. The yellow gingham from her daughter's Easter dress, the blue floral cotton from the apron she wore every summer, the deep green flannel from Charles's favorite shirt, the one he always reached for when raking leaves in October. She kept the quilt folded now, resting on the back of the rocking chair in the corner of the bedroom. It had become more than a blanket. It was a kind of altar, a quiet testimony to the God who had carried her through. That afternoon, as a light rain tapped gently on the roof, Clara moved toward the chair. She pulled the quilt over her lap and sat back, the slow rhythm of the rocker beginning to move. She listened, not for anything specific, just for the presence, the kind that often came in the quiet between movements, between sighs. There, beneath the weight of that quilt, she remembered something. A moment, years ago, when she had been sick with pneumonia. It had been a hard week. Nights filled with coughing, fever, and tears. Charles had stayed up with her, placing a cool cloth on her head, whispering prayers when he thought she was asleep. One morning, when the fever broke, he brought her a cup of tea and tucked a blanket around her shoulders. Not the quilt, this was long before that, but a wool blanket from his parents' house. She had never forgotten that moment. The feeling of being wrapped, held, covered. Now, as the rain grew steadier outside, Clara closed her eyes and whispered aloud, "Cover me again, Lord, like you did then." And he did, not with cloth, not with thread, but with his own nearness, like wings around her, like feathers brushed across her soul. Take a deep breath, rest here for a moment. You are not exposed, not forgotten, not alone in the rain. You are wrapped, held, covered by the tenderness of God himself. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. There is a quilt of grace around your life, stitched from every sorrow, every joy, and every moment he held you. You are covered under his wings. The Lord is faithful to all his promises and loving toward all he has made. Psalm 145:13. Some promises slip away with time, even the ones made with good intentions. A visit that never happens. A phone call forgotten. A vow spoken in youth but faded in age. But not all promises are like that. Some stay. Clara sat in the quiet of her living room. the evening light resting across her knees like a folded robe. The clock ticked softly behind her. Outside, the hush of night was gathering, drawing shadows gently across the porch. She had just finished reading from the Psalms. One line kept echoing in her heart. "The Lord is faithful to all his promises." Faithful. She whispered the word out loud. It tasted like something she had always known, even as a girl. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes. There had been many promises made in her life, some fulfilled, some broken, some simply left behind. A friend who had promised to write but never did. A child who had said, "I'll come back soon, Mama." But the years stretched long. Even her own lips had made promises she couldn't always keep. But God, he had never broken one, even when it felt like he was silent, even when the answer came slower than her tears, even when she had almost stopped asking. Still, he had stayed. She remembered a time, decades ago, when she had prayed for help, truly cried out, knees on the floor, fists clenched in the dark, the details blurred now, but not the memory of his presence. She hadn't heard a voice. She hadn't seen a sign, but something had shifted. Peace had arrived like dawn, soft and sure, and he had kept coming, in the friendships that found her, in the comfort that came when Charles passed, in the scripture that rose in her heart on sleepless nights. God had promised to be with her, and he had been. God had promised to carry her, and he did. God had promised to love her, and he never stopped. Clara opened her eyes and looked across the room. On the mantel, there was a small cross carved from olive wood, a gift from a neighbor long ago. She had almost forgotten it was there. She stood slowly, walked over and took it in her hands. It was smooth, simple, steady, just like the one who had promised. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. Not all promises fade. Not all are forgotten. The promises of God are not thin paper, they are stone. They stay, even when you doubt, even when you drift, even when you grow old and weary. He remembers what he spoke over you, and he is still keeping it. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. The promises of God are not dependent on your strength. He is faithful, even when you are tired. His word still holds. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run to it and are safe. Proverbs 18:10. Clara had always loved names. Not just the sound of them, but the weight they carried, or the way a name could hold history, affection, even a prayer. Her own name had come from her grandmother, Clara May, a woman remembered for warm bread and firm faith. Every time someone called her name, she felt a quiet thread tying her to that legacy. But there was one name that meant more than all the rest. She spoke it more often now than ever before. Not always aloud, sometimes only in thought, sometimes in whispers too soft for the walls to hear, sometimes through tears, sometimes through sleep. Jesus, the name above all names. It wasn't a shout in her mouth. It wasn't the beginning of long prayers or declarations. It was something quieter, something nearer, like the sound of home when the world felt loud, like the memory of her mother humming while folding laundry, like the first light of morning sliding under the door. She had found that his name carried her more than her prayers ever could. She didn't always know what to say, didn't always have words for her longings or her fears. But his name, that was enough. Jesus. Some days she would simply sit on the porch, Look out toward the fading trees and say his name once softly, slowly, as if placing it gently in the air. That was her prayer, and it never returned empty. There was something in his name that reminded her she was safe. Not safe from sorrow, not from loss. She had known both, but safe in her soul, safe in the parts of her that no one could see, safe in the questions she hadn't answered yet, safe in the waiting, in the wondering, in the silence. She thought of the verse, "The name of the Lord is a strong tower." She didn't need a tower made of stone. His name was enough. It rose above every fear. When the storms of her thoughts grew loud, she whispered it. When sleep felt far, she breathed it. When loneliness came in the evening like a fog, she sat with it. Jesus. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. You don't need to have the perfect words. You don't need to carry the whole prayer. His name is enough. Say it like a lullaby. Say it like a sigh. Say it like someone who knows that help is already on the way. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. His name is your refuge. In your quietest moments, whisper Jesus and know you are held. The wind blows wherever it pleases. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit. John 3:8. There was a sound Clara loved more than music, more than rain on the roof, even more than hymns sung softly by the church choir. It was the sound of wind through the pines. Behind her house, beyond the fence, stood a small grove of tall, slender pine trees. Their branches were high, and their needles caught the wind like tiny fingers playing gentle melodies. Some afternoons, Clara would sit in the rocking chair on the back porch and listen. Today was one of those days. The sky wore a quiet gray, not dark, just thoughtful. The air had the scent of autumn wood smoke from distant chimneys, leaves on damp ground, a promise of colder days to come. She pulled her shawl around her and rocked gently, each movement in time with her breathing. Slow, quiet, steady. And as she rocked, the wind began to stir the pines. It wasn't loud at first, just a whisper, barely touching the air. But soon it grew into a soft murmur, like voices from another room. Voices she knew. The trees moved gently, swaying, bending slightly, but never breaking. She watched them, and she thought about the Holy Spirit. How often in her life, God had moved quietly like this wind, unseen yet felt deeply, gentle yet powerful enough to change the landscape of her heart. There were times she'd wished God would speak louder, that he would come with certainty, clarity, or at least visible signs. But more often, he came like this, like the wind through pines, a gentle nudging toward forgiveness, a soft reminder to trust, an almost imperceptible invitation to rest. She had learned to trust that wind. It had guided her through storms, through grief, through days when hope felt fragile. Clara closed her eyes. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, "for speaking softly." In the silence that followed, the wind spoke again, a little stronger now, yet still tender, like a reassurance, like the hand of a friend, quietly holding hers. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit. The verse settled into her memory again. She smiled softly, recognizing herself in it. She couldn't control the Spirit's movements, couldn't predict them, couldn't demand them. She could only yield. She could only trust. And when she did, it always led to peace. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. You don't need to know where every path leads. You don't need to see the end from the beginning. Let yourself be led. The Spirit knows the way. He moves gently, softly, certainly, like wind through the pines. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. You can trust the quiet leading of the Holy Spirit. He knows exactly how to guide you home. You have kept count of my tossings, put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your book, Psalm 56:8? There was a small wooden box Clara kept in her dresser drawer. It wasn't special looking, just simple, polished oak. Its edges had been worn smooth over the years, touched gently again and again. Inside the box were things she rarely looked at now, yet still treasured. A faded photograph, a small silver locket, and letters, so many letters. Some held joy, others sorrow, but each had meant enough to be kept. But tonight, when the house was quiet and moonlight spilled across the floor like liquid silver, Clara opened the box again. She wasn't looking for a memory, not really. She was looking for something deeper, a place for her tears. Today had been one of those days when memories came uninvited. Not painful exactly, just tender. She had found herself thinking of those she missed most. Her mother, Charles, friends who had walked quietly into eternity. Her heart had felt heavy, but not unbearably so, just quietly full. So now, in the soft silence of evening, she sat with the box open in her lap. A single tear slipped down her cheek and onto the folded letters. She didn't wipe it away. She let it stay. You know about this one too. Don't you, she whispered to the Lord. He had counted every tear. Not one had slipped past him unnoticed. She had known that truth since she was a young girl, first hearing Psalm 56 in Sunday school. Back then, she'd pictured God holding a tiny bottle, carefully catching each drop. Now, older, she understood it was more than poetry. It was truth. Every tear was known. Every tear mattered. The quiet tears no one else saw. The happy tears shed at weddings, at new babies, at answered prayers. The tears cried alone in a dark room, in a hospital hallway, beside a graveside. All were sacred. All were held. Clara closed the box and placed it gently back in the drawer. She didn't need to carry her tears alone. They already had a home, a safe place in the heart of God. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. Every tear you've cried has mattered. Every tear has been caught. Every tear has been treasured. God knows them all. He keeps them safe. And one day, every tear will be wiped away. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Your tears are not forgotten. God holds everyone gently, carefully, until the day they're no longer needed. Draw near to God, and He will draw near to you. James 4:8. The clock on the mantel chimed softly, marking the slow passing of another gentle hour. The evening had settled, softening the edges of the day until all that remained was quiet. Clara had been sitting in her favorite armchair, a book open on her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in nearly an hour. Her thoughts had wandered away back to places and people who had shaped her heart, to quiet miracles she had seen unfold over decades. The house around her was still, bathed in the kind of peace that only comes at day's end, after all has been done, and nothing remains but rest. She looked toward the window. The stars were beginning to wake, gently piercing the deep velvet sky with points of quiet light. They always came. Always. Just like He did. In all the years of her life, through every season of joy, of grief, of waiting, He had always come. Sometimes she saw Him clearly in answers to prayers whispered in desperation. Sometimes He was quieter, felt rather than seen, a subtle warmth that filled the spaces between breaths. But always, always he came. Tonight was no different. She closed her eyes and breathed slowly, deliberately, as if breathing could somehow draw her closer to him. "I knew you would come," she whispered gently into the empty room. No angel appeared, no voice spoke aloud, but peace, real, warm, certain, settled over her like a blanket. She thought about how long she had known him. She thought about the days when her faith had felt thin, stretched by disappointment and fatigue, and how, even then, he had never abandoned her. He had simply waited, patient and quiet, until she was ready to draw near again. And now here she was, older, quieter, yet more certain than ever. He was near. Clara reached out a hand gently, as if to touch something invisible but utterly real. She smiled softly into the quiet darkness. "I knew you would come," she said again, her voice warm and sure. And in the deepest part of her, she heard his silent reply, felt his presence in the quiet room. "I always do." Take a deep breath, rest here for a moment. He always comes in your silence, in your waiting, in your wondering. Draw near, rest here. He is close enough to hold you. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. He never leaves. Your heart can trust in his constant, gentle presence. "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you, and do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid." John 14:27. The moon was high now, its gentle silver glow bathing everything in the room with tender light. The house was quiet, deeply quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when all has been given, all has been said, and nothing remains but rest. Clara sat at the edge of her bed, looking out into the soft darkness. Her Bible rested beside her, open to a familiar passage she knew by heart. "Peace I leave with you." Peace had become her companion in these gentle years. It wasn't always so, not when she was younger, not when life seemed like a series of battles to win, problems to solve, and questions to answer. But over time, peace had come to stay. Not because life had gotten easier, but because she had learned to trust. She had learned to let go. She had learned to rest. Clara lay back slowly, feeling the comfort of her pillow beneath her head, the soft embrace of her quilt around her shoulders. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, deliberately, each breath a quiet prayer, a gentle surrender. "I trust you," she whispered softly, the words barely audible, spoken directly to the heart of God. In that tender stillness, she felt a nearness that went beyond words. It was as if Jesus himself were there beside her, softly speaking, his voice gentle yet certain. "Rest now, my child, you've carried enough." She felt the weight of those words wrap around her like arms, like wings, like the truest kind of love. She didn't need to strive. She didn't need to earn this rest. It was hers, freely given, fully secure. She thought about heaven not as something distant or strange, but as something closer than breath, a place of perfect peace, a place of gentle reunions, a place where every tear had finally found its answer. Someday she would be there, but for now heaven had come to her, right here, in this quiet room, in this gentle hour. Clara let herself sink into the peace, and in the quiet, she heard once more, as clearly as a whisper in her ear, "Rest now, my child." And she did. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. You have done enough. You have carried enough. Now let him carry you. Sleep peacefully tonight, held gently by the one who loves you most. Bedtime spiritual takeaway: Jesus has prepared rest just for you. Lay down your burdens, sleep in his peace tonight.